Okay. If you're ready, say I'm ready. All right, I believe you. We are in week 2 of a series that we're simply calling Citizens. And what we've been talking about, and what we're going to talk about for the rest of October, we've been talking about how do we operate in this world? Like, okay, if I'm a citizen of heaven and I'm a follower of Jesus, what am I supposed to do with this place that I live in? Right? What am I supposed to do as I walk in this world on this earth? Like, what am I supposed to do with that? And how do I live the way Jesus has called me to live in a place that seems to be moving in a completely different direction? The question we started with is, how do I, as a follower of Jesus, live in a world that is decaying? Did you know that the world is decaying? I mean, in multiple ways, right? I mean, there's resources that are being dried up, and there's lots of speculation about why. Population continues to grow, which means there's less land, right? But when I say the world is decaying, I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about the world is spiritually decaying. We are moving as a world, people who walk this earth, further and further away from Jesus. This country is moving further and further away from Jesus. And so the question is how do we operate, how do we exist as Christians in a world like that? And where we started was, because we're going back and forth between a New Testament scripture in the first century, a letter written by a guy named Peter, and then we're talking about Old Testament things with Daniel and his time in Babylon. I want you to get used to hearing the word Babylon, because how we're defining Babylon is any place throughout history that moves us, that is moving further away from Jesus. In fact, in Genesis, you'll learn about Babylon. In Revelation, they talk about Babylon. When John talks about Babylon in Revelation, he's actually referring to the Roman Empire, and he's calling it Babylon. Why? Because Babylon is any place that is moving the opposite direction of Jesus. Did you hear me just say that our country is moving the opposite direction of Jesus? So where do we live? We live in Babylon. And we've got to come to terms with what that means as a believer. What do we do as we live in Babylon? So in 1 Peter chapter 2, he says this, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles," everybody say foreigners and exiles, "to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul." Peter is saying to people, hey, listen, if you're a Jew and you're hearing these words, you know what it's like to be an exile. You're used to that word. Because exile, foreigners and exiles basically just means to live life and journey in a place that is not your actual home. Where you live life and you journey in a place that is not where you belong. Jews are used to this. They're in exile in Babylon in the 6th century BC. They eventually are allowed to go home, right? Nehemiah rebuilds a wall, all those things happen. But when they're sent home by a Persian empire that overtook the Babylonian empire. And the Persians are saying, you can go home, but just remember that's our land, not yours. So even when they go back to the promised land, they're still in exile. It's not their home, it's Persian. And then eventually the Greeks defeat the Persians, and there's the Greek Empire. And now the land is not theirs, it belongs to Alexander the Great. And then over time, there's a series of changing of hands until we reach the time of the Roman Empire, where now the land of Israel is not their land, it belongs to the emperor. See, Jews understand exile because they've been in exile for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But what Peter is doing is he's writing to Christians, both Jew and Gentile, and Peter is saying, hey, you might want to get used to the fact that because you're a follower of Jesus, no matter where you live, you're in exile. Why? Why would we be in exile no matter where we live? Because we are a part of two kingdoms. The kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth. And right now, the motivations of both are moving in the opposite direction. So guess what? Every day that we walk on this ground, this is not our home. Can I tell you, it's weird to me to say this is not my home. Like Sydney, Ohio is not my home. The United States of America is not my home. This world is not my home. It's weird to say that because in some ways, I'm so comfortable here. But the place that is my home, I've never been to. I've never been to the final place that is my home, but yet it's my home. And there's a tension in me that wants to be comfortable here on earth, but never wants to lose sight of my ultimate home. And I don't know if this will make sense to you. Maybe it will. But even though I've never been to my final home, the kingdom that I'm actually a part of, from the day I said yes to Jesus, I feel like I've been there the whole time. I don't know if that makes sense. But I live in this tension of being on this earth and it not being my home at the same time. And it's going to stay that way till Jesus returns. Do you know that? When Jesus returns, there's no longer two kingdoms, there becomes one. The kingdom of heaven on earth. One kingdom. One kingdom. What I want you to hear this morning is that embracing our exile is part of following Jesus. If you want to be a Jesus follower, if you want to journey towards him, you can't journey towards him and also at the same time embrace the things of the world and say, no, this is fine. We have to look at success differently through the lens of Jesus. We have to look at our finances differently through the lens of Jesus. We have to look at our marriages differently through the lens of Jesus. We have to look at parenting differently through the lens of Jesus. That's what it means to be a citizen of heaven. And if we just buy into what the world says, and we want to do it the way they say we should do it, and we want to, at the end of our time, make sure that the world sees us as successful, you're not embracing your exile. And part of following Jesus is learning to embrace that this is not our home. This is not our home. So, we have a very unique opportunity because of the time frame that we live in and the timing of this message to break apart what it looks like to be citizens of heaven on earth in a political climate. Right? I don't know about you, but in my house, I feel like my kids are now memorizing the political commercials. Like they pop on and my son will be like, Bernie Moreno, and he'll start talking. I'm just like, stop, you know? It just seems like they're inundating the TV. They're inundating the radio. The internet. Everywhere you look, you're just bombarded with political messaging. And so the question really for me was, if this world is not our home, should we avoid participating at all in our election? Like, should we just be like, dude, that's your problem. Like, I'm going this direction. Maybe I should just take my hands off completely because this world is not my home. And so what I want to do today is we're not going to have a conversation about who to vote for. We're not going to go through every issue on the platforms. We're not doing that. But here's what I want to do. I want to create an opportunity today that'll make all of us a little uncomfortable to wrestle with what does it actually look like, irregardless of political systems. What does it actually look like to be a citizen of heaven in the political climate that you find yourself in? So that's what we're going to do today. And in order to do that, we're going to go visit our friend Daniel. Daniel, 6th century BC, the king at the time, a king named Jehoiakim of Israel, this king of Judah actually, this king was paying off Babylon to be their protector, to be their support. Okay, kind of like a mafia situation, right? We'll give you some money. You'll make sure nobody invades us. We have a good scenario here. Well, the climate was changing around Judah, where there was a lot of fighting between Egypt and Babylon and Assyria. And at the time, King Jehoiakim made a decision to no longer pay Babylon for their protection, because he thought maybe he was fighting a losing battle by siding with Babylon. Well, the money stops. Do you know what the Godfather does when the money stops? You sleep with the fishes, right? So King Nebuchadnezzar made his way into Israel. He took people. He took the land. And he burned the temple to the ground. And Daniel was one of those people who was taken. And we talked about that a little bit last week. So Daniel finds himself in Babylon, a place moving in the opposite direction of God that has its own systems, its own structure. And he finds himself in a political system that is a little less democratic. It's King Nebuchadnezzar, and the system is called an authoritarian system. An authoritarian political system basically says, I'm in charge, I call the shots, I don't need your opinion. Some of you are thinking, I want to be the leader of that system. And others of you are like, that's crazy. I call the shots, you don't question me, and if you do question me, I'll kill you. That's where Daniel finds himself. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 1, starting at verse 3. It says this: Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after they were to enter the king's service. 3 years of training, language and learning, and then eventually they would be in the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief officials gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Okay, do you see what's happening? Do you see what they're doing to these people? They're bringing them in. Let's just look at it. There's 5 things that I think happen. Number 1, they're taken captive. So they're taken from their land. 2, they're prepared to be slaves. They no longer have trades of their own. They're there simply to be slaves to the king. 3, new language and literature. We're going to teach you a new language. You're going to have to do things differently. You're going to have to speak differently. 4, you got to eat and drink at the king's table. And 5, you don't even get to keep your name. We're giving you a brand new name. Your life as you know it has just now been wiped off the face of the earth. You're made brand new in Babylon. Do you see it? New name, new language, new literature. What was happening? They were being brainwashed to embrace Babylon, weren't they? They were being brainwashed to see Babylon. Man, what a gift to eat from the king's table. Wow. They're being brainwashed to accept and embrace Babylon as the place they belong. They were being brainwashed to think that Babylon was what mattered, not following God. Can I tell you that we're going through the same brainwashing? That as we exist on this earth, we're being drawn to the world, and the world is saying to us, we got you. We got you. Here are the things that should matter to you. You want to know when you die whether or not you've had a good life? Here's the list of what your life should look like before you die. You're being brainwashed to believe that what matters most is what the world has to offer. But what I want you to hear this morning, and hear me deeply, Babylon will always try to convince you that Babylon holds all the answers for life. Wherever you find yourself, whatever Babylon you find yourself in, Babylon will convince you that all that matters is following Babylon. That if you continue to lean into what the world offers you, you'll be good. The response in Scripture to that is, what good is it if a man gains the whole world yet loses his soul? What good is it? And the world would say, it's perfectly good. You lived a good life. You got everything that you ever needed, everything you ever wanted. Man, if I remember thinking to myself at different points in my life, if I could just end up with a pile of money and a house that I'm proud to live in, debt-free, with children who listen. Why'd you laugh at that? With children who listen, and a wife who waits at me at the door every time I walk in. Sweetheart, my day is complete because you have entered the home. Man, don't look at me like that. But if that was real, didn't I live a good life? Not without Jesus. Because I tell you, I'd rather be up to ears in debt with no money in my pocket, with kids that don't listen, and a wife when I walk in the door, she goes, "Sup," and walks away. I'd rather have that and Jesus at the center of my life as I try to figure that out than have the whole world and lose my soul. See, Babylon will always try to tell you this world is all you need, and it's not. This world has nothing for you. Jesus is all you need. Verse 8, but Daniel resolved, everybody say resolved. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. He asked for permission. He didn't stand and say, "This food is unacceptable." He said, "Hey man, would it be okay if I didn't eat it?" He was resolved. He was resolute. He wasn't going to change his mind. He was resolved to it. Well, what's the issue with the food, Tim? Like, why is that such a big deal? I think it's a big deal for 3 reasons. The first is this: it wasn't kosher. And in Jewish culture, through Deuteronomy and Leviticus, flip those, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it talks about food laws and how food needs to be prepared and what foods need to be separate from each other. And so the food of Babylon would have been seen as unfit. And putting it in him would be considered sinful in Jewish culture. It would defile him. That's one. 2, the food at the king's table was more than likely food that was offered as sacrifices to the gods of Babylon. So this is food that was used to worship the gods of Babylon in the face of the God of Israel. And 3, in that culture, to sit with someone at a table and share a meal was seen as having community with them. And so Daniel saying yes to that would be Daniel saying yes to community with Babylon. He wasn't willing to do that. He wasn't willing to do that. Verse 9, now God has caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." See, if you don't eat the food from the table, Daniel, you're not going to look as healthy. You're not going to be as fit. The king's going to notice. He's going to say what happened. I'm going to say I let you not eat the food, and he's going to kill me. Daniel responded to that in verse 11. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servant for 10 days. Do you remember how long they're going to be in training? 3 years. He's like, "Can I get 10 days? Can I get 10 days? Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance to that of the young men who ate the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. Daniel says, "Would it be okay? I'd like to ask permission to not eat the food." The guy says, "No, because he'll kill me." And then he says, "Please?" Do you see it? Like, Daniel isn't trying to uproot a system. Daniel's trying to work with what's in front of him. He's trying to figure out what this looked like. What I see is that he cared deeply and he took action. Say that with me. He cared deeply, he took action. He actually stopped and said, "This isn't going to work for me. I'm resolved to not let it go any further in my life. I'm going to do something." He cared deeply and he took action. And his action was interesting. When he acted, he did not act in a way that is counter to the character of God. He didn't say, "I don't appreciate what he's doing, I'm just going to kill this guy." Because killing him would go against the law as well. He asked, he stepped in. Here's what I know to be true because he's resolved. That word resolved is pivotal for me. Because Daniel is resolved to not defile himself, I believe with every ounce of my body that if the official would have simply just said, "No, It's not happening. Can I have 10 days? No. Can I have 2 days? No. Can I have 1 day? No. Can I have 1 meal? No. I think Daniel would have starved himself. He was resolved. He wasn't going to eat that food. And if the Lord wanted him to live, the Lord would have sustained him in a completely new and different way. Daniel was not eating that food. He cared deeply. He took action. His action was to still honor people and to show love. But in the midst of that, he was not budging. He was not budging. We live in a world right now where it feels like if you show honor and respect and love to people, it's like you have to budge. You have to think differently, feel differently. You have to give up on some of your values and the things that No. Listen closely. You can be kind to people, you can love them well, and you can still hold fast and be resolved to the things that God has called you to at the very same time. Verse 15 says this, at the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate at the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, which we know is 3 years. At the end of the 3 years, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. And then verse 19, the king talked with them and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. No matter who he talked to, no matter how many people that came in, these 4 guys stood out among the rest on vegetables and water, right? See, in a political system that asked them to abandon their beliefs, Daniel and his friends willingly gave up their name, their language, their literature, and even their freedom, but resolved to not go against the food laws of their faith. They would not defile themselves. They drew a line. Imagine your whole life, your name is Daniel, and some dude takes you captive and tells you your name is Belteshazzar. That's the worst. Like if you're Daniel, you could be called Dan or Danny. They're gonna call you Belty? Like what? I mean, it's a terrible name. I feel super bad for Azariah. That dude got the name Abednego. What a terrible name. And here's what they said to that. You can change my name. Changing my name doesn't defile me. You can change my language. Could you imagine being put somewhere else where you had to learn a brand new language that you had never heard before? You can change my language. That's fine. I'll learn something brand new. You can change what I read in my literature. No big deal. You can even make me a slave. Because freedom is not guaranteed. And losing your freedom does not defile you. But when you present me with food offered to gods that's not kosher, that's where I draw the line. And at that point, you can kill me. Isn't that crazy? You can change my name, you can make me a slave, but if you change my food, something inside of them said, this is not okay because now this becomes a sin issue. It becomes a defiling issue. And at that point, I can't budge. So let's go back and read 1 Peter chapter 2 again. Here we go. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of wrongdoing, they may see your good deeds, your actions. They may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits. Goes on to say this, submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Time out. Every human authority? Every? Like I'm supposed to, no matter what generation I grew up in, no matter what period of time I live in, no matter if I'm in a democracy, in a monarchy, or I find myself in authoritarian government, wherever I live, I'm supposed to submit myself to every human authority? Yeah. Well, what does that mean, Tim? Here's what it means. Whether you're listening to this message in the United States of America or you're listening to this message in China this morning, here's what that means. The people who are in charge in the earthly kingdom. But hear me. We submit to them as our earthly leader. But this earth is not my home. And when we're asked as believers to live in a way, us specifically, to live in a way that is counter to the kingdom of heaven, we must become resolute. We must be resolved to say no. So let me tell you what that means in my life. There could come a day, I'm not in fear of it, there could come a day where I'm not allowed to do this. There could come a day where standing in front of you and sharing the gospel is no longer allowed. There could come a day where someone would walk in the door and arrest me for doing this. There could come a day where I lose my life because I'm standing up for Jesus in a world that's moving further away from him. Let me tell you something as your pastor. I am resolute. Resolute. They can put me in jail. They can take my life. I will never stop sharing the message of Jesus. I'm resolute as your pastor. So here's what that means. What that means is you can change my name, you can change my language, you can put me in a political system that doesn't make sense. I can have feelings about education, I can have feelings about healthcare, I can have feelings about the things that are happening in our country that maybe I would do a little differently. I can have all those feelings, but you know what? We have to adapt as believers to where we are, but we don't have to stop being resolute about what the gospel says. We can hold firm to those things. Submit yourself to every human authority for the Lord's sake, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and commend those who do right. Then he says this, for it is God's will that by doing good, everybody say do good. I'm not talking about the restaurant, although have you been there? It's so good. The Do Good restaurant in Osgood, you should check it out. However, by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. So, just like Daniel, if you care deeply, take action. If you care deeply, take action. Can I make you a little uncomfortable? Can I have permission to make you uncomfortable? You good with that? Okay, the ones who didn't say anything, this is your time to leave. Okay? Let me make you a little uncomfortable. Can I tell you that I think democracy has made us lazy? I think democracy and the political system that we live in has made us lazy. And here's what I mean by that. Let's just, and I'll use an easy example so I don't push a hot button. Let's say this. Let's say I'm unhappy with the education system in the state of Ohio. Okay? I'll use that as like a generic thing. And there's two candidates. One of them agrees with me, and one of them is wrong. Okay? There's two candidates. And I make a decision, you know what? This matters a lot to me. So let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to vote for someone else to take action on my behalf. Because I don't want to care deeply and take action. I want to care deeply and vote so somebody else takes action. See, we've convinced ourselves that voting is action. Y'all, remember, you gave me permission. Y'all, listen. If voting is what was required to take action, then the Lord would have saw fit that everyone in this world had a right to vote. Do you know who didn't have a right to vote? Jesus, as he walked this earth in an empire that he lived in. Do you know who didn't have a right to vote? Daniel. Throughout centuries, people have not had the right to vote. In fact, we're part of a minority that has the right to vote. Your vote is not action. Take action in the places that you care. What do you mean by that, Pastor Tim? Well, let me tell you how Jesus did it. Do you know what was unfair in the first century? How they treated lepers. Do you know what they did with those people? If you had leprosy, you were kicked out of your house, you never saw your family again, you were sent into the desert to create a new community for yourself. Hopefully there's other lepers that you can hang out with, because if not, you're all alone for the rest of your life. And every time you walk into town, for any reason, you scream the word unclean. You say, unclean, 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 like it was your name, so that people could separate so no one would actually touch you. Do you know what Jesus did in the face of leprosy and the injustice? Let me tell you what he didn't do. He didn't go into the town square and say, y'all are treating lepers wrong. We need to create a new bill that we can vote on that takes better care of lepers. That's not what Jesus did. You know what Jesus did? He went to the leper. He went right to him. And you know what else he did? He touched him. Do you know how women were treated in the first century? They were property. They weren't even seen as people in most cases. Do you know what Jesus did? He went to women and he invited them to follow him. And he saw them as people. Church, if you actually care about something more than just a vote, like it's something in you that's deep, that you care deeply for, I invite you to go to people. You care about the issue of abortion? Let's get into it. You care about the issue of abortion? Here's my question. If you care deeply about this issue, who are you talking to? And I'm not saying who are you trying to convince to vote the way you vote. Have you ever sat with a woman who's had an abortion? I have. I've sat with women who've been broken because of their decision. And you know what I learned? Here's what I learned. I didn't understand abortion as much as I thought I did. Their story helped me see it differently. Not change my opinion, but I saw the brokenness. It made it real for me. You have real strong opinions about hot topic issues like the LGBTQ community and what does all that mean and how does that operate in our society. That's fine. Do you know what I've done? I've sat with people who are part of that community, and I've learned a lot about their struggle. It may not change how I vote. It may not change what I see in Scripture, but they're people. Jesus went to people. He stopped looking at things as problems and policies. He went to people because they're things he cared about. So here's what that means. What that means is you can't care that deeply about everything, because ain't nobody got that kind of time. But if you care, take action. Sit with people who are unlike you. Spend time with organizations that align with you, that you can come alongside and get your hands dirty. Jesus got his hands dirty. If you care deeply, take action. So, here's the question. How do I live as an exile politically in America? You ready? I've got a few things, and then we're going to wrap up. The first is this. Citizens of heaven choose kingdom over nation. Everybody say kingdom over nation. Kingdom over nation. We live in the United States of America. We are blessed to be here because of the freedoms that we have that are not shared around this world. But let me tell you, that is secondary to the kingdom of heaven. Wherever you are in this world, you can live out Jesus with or without the good old USA. Jesus, you guys know Jesus was not American, right? I just want to make sure we're clear. Okay. Kingdom over nation. Citizens of heaven choose kingdom unity over political division. It's not that we can't be divided on issues. It's not that we can't see things differently, because there's opportunity to have good discussion in there. But if you're a follower of Jesus and I'm a follower of Jesus, even if we disagree on something politically, we are brothers and sisters. Kingdom unity first. Then we can discuss what divides us. This world just says, be divided. The world offers division. But as followers of Jesus, we strive for unity, not division. Third, Citizens of heaven choose heavenly trust over earthly fear. This isn't our home anyway. And if this whole thing falls apart, there's still a home waiting for me. I choose Jesus and what he has for me over the things that are happening in this world that terrify me. Right? I was listening to the news the other day, and I actually heard someone say, and I don't know if this is completely true, but I thought I heard someone say that Iran is at a place now where they can build a nuclear bomb in a week and a half. Okay? When I was a kid, they would be like, Iran is 3 years away from its first nuclear bomb. It was different. It's different. That's terrifying to me. Not just for Iran, but for any country that can build things that quickly. But here's what I know. I don't belong here. And I'm here until the Lord says I'm not. And I will not live in fear of things of this earth when I'm a citizen of heaven. I trust in him. I trust in him. So I choose heavenly trust over earthly fear. And the citizens of heaven finally choose people over policies. Okay? Every policy that you have an opinion about is attached to people. Right? It's all attached to people. Education is about children. Healthcare is about people. Abortion is about life. Any hot topic that you want to talk about, it's attached to people. Jesus saw people, church family, in this tough political climate. Would you just see people? I'm not asking you to change how you see the world. I'm asking you to remember that it's not just policies, it's people. They're people. Every one of them. The teenager who wakes up one day and decides, I don't want to be a girl anymore, I want to be a boy. Look at me. That's a person made in the image of God, and we got to wrestle with that. Not policies, people. Jesus saw people. Don't miss people because you're staring at policies. Citizens of heaven understand that. It's people over policy. And finally, I guess what I would just say, and I'm only going to say it once, you'll probably never hear this from me again at the pulpit again. maybe 4 years from now. I say this. I think you should vote. Vote, but more than vote. Right? Your vote is not your action. You should vote because you've been given a privilege that people throughout this country have died for, so that we could have a singular voice in a giant process. But let me tell you, when you vote, if everyone you vote for loses, if every position you stand for fails, if in the end your singular voice did no earthly good as you see it on the Wednesday after the election, can I tell you something? This world is not your home. Use your voice and then live as a kingdom citizen. This world is not your home. So you should vote, I think. That's not if you don't vote, you should find a new church. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we have a gift here that generationally has not always been offered to people. It's good to use it. But in the end, my earthly vote for what's happening on this earth and in this world, it's secondary to me, to what the kingdom offers. And I will submit, for the Lord's sake, to every human authority. Vote, but do more than vote. So let's talk about car conversations today, because obviously this would be a really interesting one on the way home, where you ask your child, what did you learn about abortion this morning? No, they didn't. Just kidding. The conversation is, how can we talk about this with our children in a way that's meaningful? So here are two questions that I think could work on the way home. The first is this: how do I treat those I disagree with? Does it look the way Jesus treats people? Okay? And then the second is this: how can I honor someone this week who is different than me? How can I just love someone else because Jesus loves me? How can I love someone who's different than me this week? The bottom line is just this: And just to cue you in, it's the same from last week. We're a part of two kingdoms, but only one can be your home. You got to choose a home. Are you part of the kingdom of heaven? Or are you part of the kingdom of this earth? It changes everything. It changes how we live, how we treat people, and it changes how we vote. Where is your home? Where do you build your life?